Roland Hulme, welcome back to the show.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It was such fun last time. And when I heard you talking about Indiana Jones, I mean, there are an awful lot of very qualified people, but I was like, oh yes, because he's big for me.
Well, that's, I think, one of the things that was really fun when we first met was realizing, as much as we're both Bond fans, we're both big Indiana Jones fans. But yet
Absolutely.
there isn't like an indie community as much as there is a Bond community.
Do you know, you're quite right, which is interesting when you think about it. I mean, I guess there's a smaller canon to explore, but yeah, I mean, I studied history because of Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, I'm still find history fascinating to this day. And it's like Indiana Jones was kind of like my gateway into that.
Mm-hmm. You were just at Comic-Con with your son. How many Indiana Jones did you see walking around?
I only saw one, but I stood behind him for quite a long period of time because we were all waiting to get Hayden Christensen's get our photo taken with him. So, I saw one, but it's funny how you go back each year and you have different groups. Like a couple of years ago, everyone was Harley Quinn. And
Mm-hmm.
like this year, everyone was a Mandalorian, but it tended to be part of the Death Watch or part of one of the other ones who wasn't necessarily Boba Fett or the Mandalorian. It was like
Mm-hmm.
other Mandalorians. But I guess that kind
Yeah.
of fit.
Well, I find it a little interesting because this is a complete tangent, but there are fewer Din Djarin at Comic Cons, at least the couple that I've been to since the show came out, than I expected.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the year it first came out, I remember seeing a few at New York Comic Con. Boba Fett comes up pretty regularly, but this year it was people like Mandalorians, but
Mm-hmm.
Din Djarin as the Mandalorian tends to be like one of the ones that doesn't get done as regularly.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's because it's so difficult to polish your armor when it's that shiny.
I personally believe that. That's my thought. But talk about a film with polish on it. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This is the first one that actually is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And I also love that this is the first that has like the credit that we associate with Indiana Jones, which is an adventure
Yep.
type of stylized logo. When did you first see Temple of Doom, Roland?
It was in the 80s. I think my parents took me to see it when it came out. And then as soon as it came out on video and cassette, I'd watch it. I loved that movie. I was obsessed with it. I had a huge picture of Indiana Jones, a poster of Indiana Jones over my bed with his shirt, his sleeve ripped off, holding a
Mm-hmm.
machete on the bridge. And I remember there were parts of that movie. I think I loved it so much because it really freaked me out
Mm-hmm.
as a kid, especially the scenes with like the prince being hypnotized and having to drink blood and all the kids who are slaves and the scenes with the bugs. I mean, as a kid, that movie was exhilarating, but it also terrified me.
Mm-hmm. Just the right kind of level of it. My first memory of this movie was I didn't see it before my younger brother. And my younger brother was watching it. Parents were out on a date, and he was downstairs watching it on like the box television and cuddled up on the bed. And was like, I'm bored. So I snuck down the stairs, crouched behind the bed, was like going to jump scare him. What I didn't realize my timing was perfect. It was just at the moment where the heart was getting ripped out.
Kalima,
Kalima.
Kalima.
And just as he was saying that, I leap up and yell, and my brother screams like a little girl, falls back. Like, granted, I think we were both preteen at that point, so the reactions were justified, but I could not have planned that better. It's perfect
No.
timing.
And it seemed to be scarier than any of the others. I mean, Raiders of the
Mm-hmm.
Lost Ark didn't pull any punches, but
Mm-hmm.
like Temple of Doom went quite intense.
It went the full moxie, which is one of the many things I admire about this movie. Because really, there's so much in this film that I think what's amazing is there really is. It's also extremely lighthearted at other moments. Like the interactions between Indy and Short Round were some of my favorites in this movie. I was thinking about this film, like, does the thing where we have a kid in it in an 80s movie, but it doesn't feel, oh, we just shoved a kid in the movie so that the kids in the audience think that like they're there with him. Short Round is actually a really fun character throughout the story. And like him and Indy playing cards, playing poker,
Yeah.
while Willie's running around like a chick with her head cut off, scared by the jungle, and they're just chill and complaining about who's cheating at poker. chef's kiss.
It was really interesting because he was kind of like a father figure, but at the same time not. He was almost treating Short Round like a buddy. And I loved how Short Round was competent. Normally you have kids and they need to be rescued all the time, but like Short Round driving that big, huge, oh, what's that beautiful car, a Duesenberg or something, with a
Oh,
block tied to his
yes.
foot. And then literally, like, he was instrumental, you know,
Mhm.
it would have all ended in a disaster if it wasn't for him. He
Mhm.
contributed in a useful way.
Yeah, which again, like this is something where kids in a story, when they actually do something and they don't feel tacked on, like again, something you did in High Point, I think is a really great example of having children in a story and it doesn't feel like, oh, this is really just a pain. Why did you do it? When they actually matter to the plot. Shocking concept. Not having extraneous characters for the sake of product placement.
And it's funny, the whole thing in High Point was, you know, Max was his stepfather kind of thing, again, I think I might have inadvertently based that relationship off Short Round and Indy because it makes sense. It's kind of like giving the kid a certain amount of responsibility that a father probably wouldn't at his age, and then and it enables Short Round to look at him with more respect because he's being treated. I don't know, it resonated with me as a kid very strongly.
Where does Temple of Doom rank for you in the four Indiana Jones films?
That's a tough one. I guess it would be third, just because Raiders of the Lost Ark is like a perfect movie.
Yeah.
Except Last Crusade is also a perfect movie.
Yeah.
And I went to the cinema with my mum to see that one and I loved it. But Temple of Doom, it's so difficult between them. I mean, obviously, like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, you can I think, yeah. I don't think most people would argue with that, but the rest is difficult.
Well, and that's the thing. I've always argued that Temple of Doom would be the best of any franchise if it was not paired with two of the other best movies ever made.
Yes, absolutely. I found it was fascinating that it was a prequel. And it's not necessary, they don't make a big thing of it. I guess you'd have to be a kind of nerd to think about it.
Yeah.
But that was really interesting for a sequel to a movie that left things open with tons of stuff Indy could be doing in the future. They went back into the past, and I thought that was kind of interesting.
I think it really does resonate more with that adventure serial idea, where again, as much there's a part of me that thinks that three movies, perfect, leave it there. That would have been like unstoppable trilogy. But the idea of the adventure serial where they have this literally history that they could do of just adventure, adventure, adventure.
Yeah.
And this, again, I think it sets a better stage of this is like an adventure serial. You're seeing different adventures of this guy's life at different points. And oh my goodness, the entire opening sequence. So first I'll ask, is there anything that stood out to you in this rewatch compared to the past?
I think how much more of a scoundrel he was, and you know, he's seeking fortune and glory, and it's like obviously he's always been a bit of a scoundrel, but this was like he was a different character. He was younger, he was out for glory, he was more selfish, and that's kind of one of the progressions of his character arc through the book, which then set him up to be the college professor in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was interesting to see his story almost in reverse, but I definitely noticed how different his character was.
Yes, that same, because so yesterday I got to see Raiders on the big screen because they were doing a re-release, which was so cool. But immediately going from watching then Raiders to watching Temple of Doom like back to back, it is interesting to see just how much Indy has a different character arc. Because I say character arc loosely. Indiana Jones's character isn't full. He's fairly shallow. He's not meant to have a whole lot of depth. So they give him like the slimmest of arcs possible, but even with that, it makes it work. And you see in that first movie, the thing that struck me was him as a scoundrel, as his behavior with Willie. Like, it is very clear he finds this woman nothing but irritating for the majority of the story. And then when they're at the Bangkok Palace, finally he's like, so like studying mating rituals is like his pickup line. And he walks in there and you're like, literally like 10 minutes ago, you were like, this is the most annoying chick on earth. And now you're like, I think I want to bang her. Like there's zero progression on like romance up to that point.
I don't know, you just described my marriage. I'm sure she feels the same way.
I'm taking notes. The opening of this film is the most Indiana Jones James Bond reference possible. Also,
Absolutely.
we have that gong, which I didn't realize because I hadn't seen Gunga Din in ages. When I rewatched Gunga Din, I realized that's the same gong that he's hitting in the intro. What did you think of the opening segment
I
where we
mean,
get
I
the
love
like
it.
Bond
That was
bands?
iconic. As a kid, I remember because I'd seen Goldfinger and I made the
Mm-hmm.
connection in my brain between that and Temple of Doom. But I remember as a kid playing with my friends that scene in particular.
Uh-huh.
You know, we grab like the what is it, the Mother's Helper or something that spins round, you know, like
Lazy
spin toy
Susan.
coins. Lazy Susan, that's it.
What a great, like, again, just like little, the more that I watch movies and the more that I write, the more I realize having those little cues makes the world so much more believable. The fact that they have the little Lazy Susan thing move around, and that's busy work that the camera can then pan on. Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, and I mean everything about that. The sound, like when he's
Mm-hmm.
hiding behind the big gong and you see the
Mm-hmm.
bullets plowing into it and you hear a gong, 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 gong,
Mm-hmm.
gong, that's amazing. And it rolls over. Where the diamond goes on the floor and then all the ice spreads everywhere, that's amazing. And Willie in that dress, like picking up the vial and putting in a cleavage and into just shoving his hand down there, but it's like there's nothing lecherous about it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really wonderful action sequence. Like, to be honest, you don't kind of see in
Mm-hmm.
movies these days. I think they're just too OTT. They're too fast and furious.
Well, and in this movie, I think that does it a lot where again, it follows that serial format where it's okay, we box them into something and then we go, how can we make it worse?
Yes.
Like with the diamond in the ice, they put the diamond on the ground. What would be the worst thing to make trying to find a diamond on the ground? Well, we'll dump ice on it too. Like, just those are things that on a rewatch of Crystal Skull recently, I missed, where we don't have like that level of we're going to just keep pushing things just a little bit more and not in a grand big way. It just needs to be a subtle thing that adds just that much more tension.
And they
Um,
do it throughout. Think of
they
the
do it
scenes with
throughout.
the roof coming down and the
Yes.
bugs and stuff. That
Mm-hmm.
again, yeah, that again as a kid, you were transfixed because
Mm-hmm.
you're like, how are they going to get out of this?
Mm-hmm.
And I've watched that so many times. The VHS cassette was falling apart, and I was still like, how are they going to get out of this?
And I also love in that intro scene, we don't see Indy's face for like the first minute of him just like walking down the stairs. I, I again, it's a trope that they pulled from the Bond stuff where we don't see Bond in those first few movies, like the first couple of scenes. And I like, ooh, good job, Spielberg and Lucas and everyone else involved.
And I like it because I think you and I, as like James Bond fans, but also Indiana Jones fans, kind of, you know, he's rough and ready in a leather jacket, but can also
Mm-hmm.
like he polishes up, but he polishes up with kind of a bit of a rough edge.
Yeah, like when he sits down wearing the white dinner jacket, I made the note, he just swaggers in with all the swagger in the world. Like he
Yeah.
looks like I can do anything.
And he's not quite as prim as James Bond would be. You know, he's got maybe like a
Mm-hmm.
day's stubble on there, and you can tell maybe he put on that tuxedo in the bathroom or something. But yeah, again, that swagger. He's
Mm-hmm.
not primped up. He wears it because that's what he has to wear if he's going to get this job done.
Mm-hmm. There's the other thing I thought of in the opening scene is it makes it so much better that it's set in Shanghai and
Yep.
that because it's really atypical gangster stuff, that entire sequence. But because of the location, it adds just that little extra of a different flavor to it that
Yeah.
really enhances that Indiana Jones is a globetrotter.
And you're right, it's got so many of the gangster tropes like the Tommy gun and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and the boss at the table and the dance number, even the song is like
Mm-hmm.
a Mandarin
Anything
version
goes.
of yeah, of an American classic, American standard, I think they would call it. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right. But and also from a historical perspective, in the 30s in Shanghai, it was like that. If you've seen all those
Mm-hmm.
old Hong Kong action movies and stuff, it's like it was cool. You had gunfights and stuff going on. And you're right, it added that exotic sheen to it. It's like
Mm-hmm.
this is something different.
Mm-hmm. And the airplane glowing, loud, good luck, Lao Chi. And then you close the door and it says Lao Chi. And oh my goodness, that was such a just good job. Like it's little things like that. There's a show called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And the one
Yep,
thing that
familiar.
they have, if you've seen the show, you know they do that. They figured out their title sequence where they say the name of the episode perfectly after someone says something like the one where they're like, who Dee's like, I don't want you to get me hurt through this. And Frank's like, nobody's going to let you get hurt. And at title, the top Frank sets Dee on fire. Like
Yeah.
those kinds of things. Or we're not desperate to win an award episode. The gang desperately tries to win an award. Things like that. Having those little subtle things that just it's a
The
good
payoffs.
payoff joke. Well, Frasier does the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny because the titles themselves were that way. That's another thing. You don't necessarily have titles that make so much sense in such a perfect way. I would say the whole thing of make those little bits, those little they fire off the dopamine in your brain, and that's what when a book has those, and or a film has that, where things get paid off. And it all ends to a denouement when you've got everything paying off. It's like it feeds you the dopamine. I just read a wonderful thriller by Raymond Benson, and it was the same. He wrote this wonderful thriller where you got little pieces of new information at the end of every chapter, which kept you going because you're like, oh, I've already found out some stuff. I need to find out more. And then it has a big payoff at the end.
What's the name of the thriller?
It's called The Mad, Mad Murders of Marigold Way.
Okay, I've started it. I am definitely enjoying it. And I just, for me, it's fun because I grew up in the area that he writes about. So I mean, in that book, you know everyone that's in that story. You have neighbors that are like that, or you've met people like that. In this case, I'm intimately familiar with that area and those people. But you're right, the entirety, and that's what makes these first three Indiana Jones films so perfect, I think, is that they do a great job of setup, payoff with almost everything.
You talk about them being serials, but you could almost take the Temple of Doom and split it into episodes. Like the first episode is Shanghai and it ends there. The second episode is falling out of the airplane, ends there. Third episode is the village that they go to. Fourth episode is going to the Maharaja's palace. And yeah, you split it into 10-minute episodes, but it used to be with shows like that you'd watch in the cinema, it'd be like Flash Gordon or something, which would be a 10-minute little serial thing, and then you watch the movie.
Which again, I think that so we reviewed Zorro Rides Again for the show. Or like the actual plot stuff is horrible, like it's terrible. But what I love is the premise that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were able to make was, what if the action, because the action was great, what if we took the action and then gave it a good story?
Yeah.
Marvelous concept.
And the exoticness of it is really exciting, but also the history. I like the way all of the history seems kind of valid. Like, you had gangsters in Shanghai in the 30s. Yeah, you had the crumbling British Empire and the thuggy cults in that where was it? It was around Delhi, wasn't it?
Yes.
They landed. Yeah, I've been there, and I remember I was so excited when I landed in Delhi and and it's like the color of the rocks and stuff looked exactly like that.
The entire film has an incredible progression where we just get more and more of this world, because this captures that travelogue element. That I think the Bond films, especially in the Roger Moore era, definitely did. But it also, this is where I like shooting on location, where it actually does feel real. The jungle feels real in this movie. Even one of the main notes I made here was that entire set piece that they built for the thuggy cult thing. Oh, it's magnificent.
And they used to build real sets back in those days, and I guess no one did it better than Spielberg and Lucas.
It was so incredible. The other thing, this was a story note that I made. The film does a great job of keeping two things kind of happening at once. And I made this note so there's at the dinner scene, when Indy's talking with the guy and we're getting a whole bunch of exposition, we have Short Round and Willie reacting to all the crazy exotic food.
Do you know, I was thinking about it, and that it reminds me of the kind of ways they did comedy pieces in movies from the 30s and 40s. Like you could imagine, Cary Grant being in a scene like that, being the straight man while his leading lady reacts like that. I will say, out of all of it was so interesting. They took so much that was like real about Indian culture, and then the food, they don't eat food like that.
That was actually one of the questions I had to ask you is, when you were in India, did you eat monkey brains?
No, And I spoke to me being completely, I was ridiculous when I was there. I was like, have you ever seen a film called The Temple of Doom where they're eating chilled monkey brains? And like, yeah, we don't eat chilled monkey brains here. We don't eat bugs like that, scooping them out. But it was funny. That was so, not Indian culture. But again, it was as a kid, you were like
Mm-hmm.
fascinated and disgusted by it at the same time. Like the
Mm-hmm.
slurping noise where they take the head off the monkey. I remember that. And at Halloween, we'd like when we'd have a game where you put a blindfold on and feel for things, and we had a bowl of
Mm-hmm.
grapes in cold water, and we were like, these are sheep size, and it was, yeah. And I think there was a scene where he's eating the beetle and he like
Mm-hmm.
eats that bit and then it's stuck on his beard, and it's just like, as a kid you're just like, "Ah, ah, ah, ah."
For a film that has the most like kid, I'm trying to determine what the right word is, appeal, like in the idea that there's a kid in the movie, the film, one of the major plot points is that all the kids have vanished from this village and they're being forced into slave labor. Like, for as much as this film has the most like kid friendly element of all the movies, it's also the darkest and the one that's the
Yep.
most terrifying. But I think that that works in a lot of
I
ways.
think I think so. And I was just thinking of all the kids authors who've really made a place in literary history, like Roald Dahl. I know
Mm-hmm.
he's controversial, but right now, but I mean, he wrote really grotesque, disgusting, terrifying things that represented body horror. I mean, I was just thinking
Mm-hmm.
The Witches, where the main character ends up a mouse for the rest of his life. There we go. It's like there was no happy ending. There were consequences to what happened. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
takes a dark author to do that, but it really resonates with kids.
Well, I mean, you think about all most of our like old fairy tales and Grimm stuff, the Grimm Brothers Grimm, they don't tend to be happy endings. Guess what? It's
No,
usually these kids were stupid and pissed off an adult. Look what happened to them.
yeah, absolutely. And that's, I mean, to a certain extent, that's why those stories existed, isn't it?
Hmm.
It's like,
Oh, definitely a bias where little old ladies telling stories to children about how when little children piss off little old ladies, they end up in a soup.
yeah. And there's practical advice, like The Boy Who Cried Wolf. It's like,
Hmm.
hey, I need to explain this point to you, kid, so I'll use a story to tell it to you. And I guess that's where stories come from to a certain extent. They educate as well as entertain.
I heard Neil Gaiman once give a fantastic lecture. Like I found it on podcast feed where he was talking about how the basis of story is to introduce why certain things are in the world. And he was talking about this legend of like a volcano in the Polynesian culture or something like that. And guess what? Eventually, the volcano no longer was an issue, but the story persisted because it was a good story.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess so many of I don't know, so many fairy tales do have stories and things that are important to our modern culture. But I guess some of them, others don't. I mean, you can look at
Mm-hmm.
like the Bible. Some people read the Torah as like
Mm-hmm.
almost how to guide to life. And of course, times change, technologies change, values change, and things.
Mm-hmm. Which, speaking of Indiana Jones, is he a character that you think should be persisting forward? Or has he become fairly irrelevant? Because I think this is a major question when it comes to the Crystal Skull and then the Dial of Destiny, is because so much of what makes Indiana Jones work is that time period of the 30s.
Yeah.
And I still think that like the 50s kind of worked, but when we start getting towards the 60s, has the world moved past the idea of adventure in the same way?
And that's interesting. But you think the James Bond movies were set in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got something to keep beeping here. Yeah,
No
the James
worries.
Bond movies were set in the 60s. So maybe, you never know, with the Dial of Destiny, with I think it's 69 it's set in, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there's some opportunity to do globe trotting from like a slightly hip spy thing. It has to represent the period that it's in. The original movies
Mm-hmm.
were 30s movies, and um for better or for worse, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull had a lot of like 50s culture, the Harley
Yeah.
Davidson, the preppy kids, the rockers,
Mm-hmm.
you had the hot rods and things, the red scare. So maybe the 60s, depending on how you approach it, could add in elements of adventure, but I think they would have a different flavor because the 30s, a lot of the world that we discover was
Mhm.
very, very different. Shanghai was a very different city. You know, India was very different to how it is today. Like
Mhm.
probably 500 million less people or something ridiculous.
What's your favorite scene in Temple of Doom?
I
Or favorite
interest.
sequence? Like, when
I
you think of
think
this movie, what do you think of?
um I'm just trying to think. I think they're not necessarily my favorite. They're the hardest hitting scenes. Are bits the battle on the rope bridge. I think is just
Mhm.
iconic,
Yeah.
and also there's the whole scene in the thuggy temple, especially when like Indiana Jones when he gets hypnotized and he's like hurting the other kids, and you just see
Mhm.
the look of like horror and betrayal and fear on Short Round's face. And like as a kid, that stuck with me because it's like this is the guy you look up to who's always protected you, and now he's turning against you, and you have to jab something into something hot into him to bring him back to his senses. It's like those scenes really stuck with me. The whole Kalimar thing was just
Mhm.
terrifying.
The other note that I had here was that Willie Scott is the damsel of damsels,
Yes.
because it's like she is every trope of the damsel in distress. Like and they said, I was looking up trivia in this movie. They were like, we want you to be as far from Marion Ravenwood as possible. We don't want to like just keep reusing the same character idea. So she definitely does take the other extreme where she screams and not
Yeah.
she's a screamer and not in the good way. And this, she just constantly like throughout the story is needing help, which is fun to an extent because again, this is the damsel in distress trope, but pulled up a few notches so that there's enough ironic distance where we know, oh, this is what's happening.
Yeah. And she's also very charismatic and like
Mm-hmm.
funny and
Oh,
entertaining
yes.
doing it. I think.
She has so many great lines.
Yeah.
When she does the snake, she's like, I really hate that elephant. And Indy's like
Yeah.
freaking out. I love moments like that. Or when the diamond comes around, she's like, ooh.
Yes. There's a wonderful lack of like self-awareness about her. And then also
She
she
chips
has
her
a
nail.
oh yes. And she has a confidence as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
she's freaking out about things that aren't necessarily that bad, like bugs and things. And then when she's in life and death situations, she's kind of brave and fearless about it, but almost in an oblivious way.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think that comparing it to a Cary Grant film actually works really nicely because I think this film does a good job of pulling from, well, like even we were talking about Gunga Din is a Cary Grant
Yes.
film. And this film definitely pulls those echoes in a way that is refreshing and enjoyable.
Which is I think what we love about it. And the wonderful thing is with the Indiana Jones movies, you know, they keep a style of storytelling fresh and alive that would otherwise probably been forgotten, because I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that many people are watching Gunga Din anymore, but like Indiana Jones is
Mm-hmm.
still here, still with us.
And again, not to bog down into talking about the other movie, but that's one of the things that I struggled with Crystal Skull is that I feel like it didn't freshen up any of the tropes that pulled in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. Good ideas, a lot of them, but that's the preview for people for our upcoming episode on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It's This movie is so enjoyable, including the race at the end with the mines,
Oh, wasn't
the
that
mine
was
cart
another
chase.
iconic scene? I mean, that's just yeah, just you watch it and yeah, you're on the edge of your seat the whole time.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's setting up sequence. They have the set piece idea, and then they come up with what is the worst thing could start happening as this thing is
Yeah.
occurring. And I love that. It just it's good storytelling.
Like the scene, a case in point, like the examples you've given, Indiana Jones jumps off the little cart, his foot is on fire because he had to slow it down. It's like water, 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 turns around, tidal wave. And that's exactly the escalation. And then it pushes them out and they have to get to either side of this tunnel with a sheer drop. And it's like
Mm-hmm.
it just never ceases.
Mm-hmm. It keeps the pressure and the tension up, but it does also give enough breathing room. Like we have those. This film, again, having just watched it from Raiders, has more dialogue, I think.
Yeah.
It has more breathing room of we're letting the characters talk more and do more things, which makes sense because in this film we have Short Round, Willie, and Indy as like the three main characters. So you have more relationship dynamics. Rather than in the first movie, it's basically just Indy and Marion for most of the
Yeah.
film bouncing off of each other.
Yeah, I think that's you're right. And they have different relationships with each other. I think that's quite nice about having the triumvirate as you get,
Mm-hmm.
because Indy has a relationship with Short Round, and
Mm-hmm.
then Willie develops a relationship with Short Round, and then of course Indy and Willie have their relationship together. And they work in ways that show like antagonism between them, but also affection between them. It's like Willie and Short Round actually have a couple of moments where, that's quite sweet.
Mm-hmm. The one of my favorite scenes in this movie, I joked about earlier, but the whole studying the nocturnal mating rituals,
Yes.
that scene when she's like, "You'll be back in 5 minutes," and the two of them are like looking at their clocks,
That
waiting
was just
five
brilliant. That was
minutes.
just brilliant comedy writing. And
It,
yeah, there he's fighting for his life, and he
mm-hmm,
bursts in, and she thinks
mm-hmm.
like he's feral,
Be
wanting to.
gentle.
Yes.
The thing that I missed was when so he's searching around everywhere and he's checking everything, and then he gets up to the statue and pushes on the statue, and she's like, "I'm right here." The look of disgust on her face when she has to push the statue, and she's like,
Yeah. And that's yeah, it's one they managed to make her character like still enjoyable and likable,
"Mm-hmm,
even though she kind of was put in just to be annoying.
mm-hmm." Again, the writing on these three movies, and this one is so good. I have okay, but where's the line here? I love this line. Like, there's always at least like one or two lines I think are just perfect in a movie. This is one of them when she's like, uh, Willie's my professional name, and Indiana. And Short Round goes, "Hey, lady, you call him Dr. Jones." And Jones goes, "That's my professional name." Just, oh, I love
It's
this
it's
movie.
really good, believable dialogue, and I think I was watching the prequels before we went to go and see Hayden Christensen, and especially
Mm-hmm.
Attack of the Clones. The dialogue is terrible. I
Yes.
mean, they're wonderful movies, but it's like human beings don't speak like that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Temple of Doom, it's like, yeah, the dialogue is electric, and they have even the scene where
Mm-hmm.
they first go down for dinner at the Maharaja's
Mm-hmm.
palace, and they're talking
Yeah.
to, their British liaison who went to did he go to Oxford or Cambridge? I can't remember. I think,
Uh,
but they managed to have this conversation that's relevant to the history of the period, but also there's a
mm-hmm.
certain tenseness to it, and they're
Mm-hmm.
playing like a verbal game of chess.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, yeah, all of the dialogue in the different scenes is so well written that it just
Mm-hmm.
fully immerses you in it.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's also a testament to they have these first three movies. George Lucas doesn't do all the writing himself. He had incredible collaborators that he was working with, and I mean, it's part of the creative process where you and I, as writers, we're pounding out most of this by ourselves. But that's where like having editors and having
Yeah.
friends that speak into the story, having a collaboration makes art better often. Now, obviously, too many cooks in the kitchen, you just end up with a studio nightmare. But there's something to be said for this is not necessarily a singular voice to create all these characters and the story. You had lots of great professionals working together.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, that's interesting because one of the people who was brought in for No Time to Die, wasn't it, to add some
Mm-hmm.
spark to the dialogue, was Phoebe Waller-Bridge,
Mm-hmm.
who's of course in Dial of Destiny.
Yeah.
And I think she did. I mean, I'm assuming that some of the
Mm-hmm.
lines in No Time to Die that I really liked were contributed by her. So it'd be interesting to see whether Dial of Destiny has some of the magic that she's famous for.
I hope so because like I've seen her. I liked Fleabag a lot,
Mm.
but that's her writing. I don't know how much she's getting to write on this with Dial of Destiny. My hope is, if nothing else, she's getting to ad lib some really good lines.
Yeah. And I know that a lot of people are like, oh, she's going to overshadow him and stuff, which I think is, to a certain extent, I think that's a concern. They normally have
Mm-hmm.
such a great relationship, the two characters. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's going to be different to have, a younger character who does, from the trailers, seem to
Mm-hmm.
like, what would you say? She seems to have one. She seems to pull him down a peg or two.
Which done right can be good. Like I genuinely think so. There's a one of the scenes I did enjoy in Crystal Skull was when we have Mutt realize Indiana Jones a badass in
Yeah,
the graveyard scene. You're a teacher part time. That's a good exchange because again, it gives you that realization of, oh, he is competent and capable, and you get a chance to see that. And more
yeah.
importantly, you see the other character realize it.
And Nomi in No Time to Die
Mm-hmm.
did that. She
Yeah.
was trying to pull Bond back, and then I liked that. It was kind of satisfying. We all went into that movie thinking like, oh, they're replacing James Bond, it's feminism gone mad, blah
Mm-hmm.
blah blah. But actually, it's like, hey, you have a very competent female agent, but she also recognizes and defers to the competence of Bond, so you end up liking her a lot.
Mm-hmm. And I think my hope is, so we can start talking Dial of Destiny now. My hope is, and this is me being overly optimistic, I'm sure, they have the opportunity to have a really great meditation on the idea of death is the last adventure.
Yeah.
That line from isn't Peter Pan, to die is an awfully great adventure.
Yep.
If they make that like Indy's arc, I will be extremely impressed. However, then there's the cynical part of me that goes, no, they're screenwriters. They're not gonna do that. But fingers crossed. What are your hopes and expectations on Dial of Destiny?
I
Where
always
are you dialed in?
I always enjoy watching Nazis get massacred on screen.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking forward to that. The clips where obviously it seems like time travel is involved. Maybe the
Mm-hmm.
Dial of Destiny. It must be. So I kind of am a bit nervous about that because part of the reason I didn't like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was like, oh, the actual real life aliens. Okay, I can
Mm-hmm.
I can handle the Ark of the Covenant being real, but aliens
Yeah.
is a bit too much for me. And I'm like, time travel you have to handle definitely.
It's a very tricky thing. And that's where, so here's my like pitch idea on this. And this is where I honestly think that this is a more interesting idea, like sans Indiana Jones. The Dial of Destiny sounds like a very cool Jules Verne-esque
Yeah,
device. And I think that contextually, I don't know how well Indiana Jones works in that. So we have the first three movies where it's very supernatural type of artifacts, spiritual
but
stuff,
kind of grounded.
but kind of grounded. Whereas then we get paranormal and astrological in the fourth one. Okay. I feel like it's a little bit too much of a diversion. And now we have this one where it's almost more like a mechanical thing.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm going to be very curious because again, like I said, I'm actually a huge Jules Verne fan. We've talked about our fondness for Around the World in 80 Days.
Absolutely.
I think, which we should do that episode at some point.
Oh, that would be fun.
But this, I like the concept. Again, that's just the question of how does that work with the idea of Indiana Jones, like that adventurer, globetrotter. The one thing I will say, I'm more excited about this movie having seen the new trailers because the action's actually looking much better than I expected.
I mean, I saw the little thing with the tuk-tuks
Uh-huh.
screaming through the streets of wherever, and there was a Heinkel bomber. I'm obsessed with World War II airplanes, so I saw that and I was like, it's a Heinkel. So yeah, those bits kind of excited me,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind
And
of, I empathize with Indiana Jones feeling old and getting
mhm.
beaten up all the time. So I'm always there to see that, and it's nice to watch a movie where somebody who's effectively the age of my dad is still like being
Mm-hmm.
adventurous.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's where I think that we do have, again, I want to see the opportunity of how does one progress. So there's a great book I read recently called Creating Archetypal Character Arcs by K.M. Weiland. Fantastic book, highly recommend it. But what I like is she went through, these are the 6 like primary archetype arcs
Yeah.
that are really stages of life and how kind of the different antagonists and forces that work in each one of those, the like shadows, both positive and negative, that they have. But once we get past the hero arc, there's a whole lot less stories because she's like trying to give examples of this is like a mage arc, this is the queen arc, this is the king arc, but they really don't exist in our world. Like, we don't have many stories that are like, oh, this person who's taking on like the crone archetype doesn't
Yeah.
have a full progression, or a mage archetype doesn't tend to have like the full progression of a story. Usually they start turning into supporting characters in other people's stories.
That's a really because yeah, as times change, archetypes to a certain extent change and become irrelevant or obsolete.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to see how they do it, and I'm excited. Like, again, the my hope is like, if this movie's at least a 5 out of 10, I will be the happiest person on earth.
Yeah, I mean, I'm Kingdom of the Crystal Skull might not have done it for me, but I'm still happy they made it. I still
Mm-hmm.
enjoyed it. I
Mm-hmm.
still, I if it's on, I will be there for that Harley Davidson chase, which I just love. I was like, because
Mm-hmm.
I love writing story. I mean, I write stories about guys in Harley Davidsons, and there
Yeah.
aren't that many car chases involving Harley Davidsons because they're
Mm-hmm.
literally the worst vehicle to be in. They're like slow, but they also don't go around corners very well. So it's nice to see like a cool scene like that. So there were
Mm-hmm.
definitely bits in it I really, really enjoyed. So I'm happy they made it. So I think Dial of Destiny will have to be really bad for me
Mm-hmm.
to not enjoy going there. Although I did hear a rumor of like Indy's going to be erased from history and Phoebe Waller's going to take his place, and I'd be like,
That
that
would
would be a
be,
step too far.
see, I think that will honestly be the make or break thing for me. And what again, my hope is, the rumors that I've heard associated with that is basically they played that to test audiences, and audiences were like, hell no.
Yeah,
And they went, okay, so we have to rework this. I, because I think that Harrison Ford is such an intricate part of the Indiana Jones franchise. I feel like if they did that to him, it would just feel like a gut punch,
yeah,
where it would be like, you've literally dragged this old man into the film studio to basically say you're pointless. That
yes.
that would be, if even if that's not the intention, that would be what it would seem like from the audience's perspective.
I agree, and then it might not be the intention, but also it's kind of like girl power type thing of like, let's take an iconic
Mhm.
figure who men really like, really appeals to men, and then let's just have him erased and replaced by women. I can understand like that's something that you kind of take personally.
Yeah. Well, and again, this is where like Laura Croft exists. I
Yeah.
love the female adventurer. There's a So we recently had on the show Bob Dice and Wyatt Doyle from the Men's Adventure Library. They collected, I've been putting together these volumes of different men's adventure stuff. And then Bob Dice and another guy, Bill Cunningham, have put together from the men's adventure magazines, not just the artwork and the stories around one person, but like theme quarterly things. So like, I have the Jungle Girls issue. Guess what? I am 100% on board for Jungle Girls and adventure ladies. Like,
Yeah.
there is a market there that is appealing. It's just that idea of, let's have an original idea instead of being so lazy we're just going to piggyback on someone else and try to supplant that character.
I think it's something really, really ugly and toxic about popular culture at the moment, is this idea that you've got to deconstruct
Mm-hmm.
male heroes. It's like, hey, we left the Star Wars trilogy and Han Solo had proven that he wasn't a scoundrel. He was
Mm-hmm.
a man of true heart. Luke had finally found the way to bring balance to the Force. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, yeah, let's completely deconstruct those characters. Let's make Luke a completely useless old hermit, and let's make Han Solo run off and be completely useless.
Mm-hmm.
James Bond, they killed him, literally deconstructed him. And it's like, to watch Indiana Jones be deconstructed, it's like, can't you just leave our characters alone?
Yeah. Well, and on top of it, this is the struggle. Indiana Jones doesn't have enough character to be deconstructed.
Yeah.
Like, he's a very shallow character. He is an archetype of all these other adventure stuff thrown together. And that's why I feel like once we start trying to get into his personal life, it becomes harder and harder to mine from that, because he doesn't have enough character to make that possible. Like, I think this film sounds like it's going to lean a lot on him getting older, and that's hard, because
Yeah.
my bet noir is, I am aware that I'm going to age and decay. I don't need to be reminded about it in my adventure fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what does it become? It's like, oh look, Indy went up a pair of stairs all by himself.
Good job. Well, he's already doing better than Roger Moore in his last Bond films.
Oh yes. My daughter indulged me and she was like, "What's the worst James Bond movie?" So I was like, "You Two a Kill," and we watched it. And she's like, "Daddy, this is awful." Big smile on her face.
Well, and this is the thing though. The worst Bond film I can still watch with a big old smile because even if it's utterly ridiculous, it's delivering on the things you expect from a Bond film. I don't know, like I don't know if I could do that with like the worst version of Indiana Jones film.
Yeah, I think it all depends. They need to have some kind of reverence for him as a character.
Mm-hmm. At least give him a good send off. Obviously, this is the last one. I will be happy if, again, just a 5. Even if they kill him off at the end, I am okay with that. It would be hilarious if he died in a plane accident.
Yes. Because of the comic where Indiana Jones goes to the northwest of the United States and explores in the jungle and finds the wreck of the Millennium Falcon with Han Solo's corpse in the cockpit, and Chewbacca turns out to be Bigfoot.
I have not read that comic, but that
You
sounds
haven't?
amazing.
Oh, I thought that's what you were referencing.
I was referencing Harrison Ford's repeated accidents in planes.
Yeah. Can you fly? Yes. Can you land? No.
There's an interview that he did recently that I loved, where apparently, like, this lady, you might have seen it, it's been floating around on the internet. This lady's like, "You took your shirt off like within the first few minutes of the movie. That was very bold of you." And he's like, you can see the moment he's about to like explain that he's been doing all this workout and exercise because he's been working with the same guy that trained Bond,
Simon Waterson,
which I love his book, Intelligent Fitness. He actually goes through. Here's the routine I gave Harrison, because guess what? You don't train Harrison Ford and Daniel Craig with like 20 age years difference the same way, which is relevant. But he's like, "I have been blessed with an amazing body. Thank you for noticing." Just Harrison Ford, I think somehow I want to see him on screen until the day he dies. Just because he is a compelling presence. And that was one of the things, again, in Temple of Doom. You see him without a shirt. Like, I remember as a kid being like, "Oh, he doesn't look like that ripped," by comparison to, like, watch movies Schwarzenegger.
Yeah.
But now that I'm getting older and I'm working out, I'm like, Harrison Ford has done an amazing job to keep that body. Good for him.
Because he was in his 40s then, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. That's the amazing thing. Like, again, he has aged beautifully.
Yes.
If I can age nearly that well, I will be a very happy man.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll work it out. I might get that book now on your recommendation. 10 Weeks of Fitness or something.
Well, didn't he come out with a new book then?
Intelligent Fitness. No, that was the one. Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Sorry, I was getting confused because I know David Zaritsky from the Bond Experience did the 10-week Bond challenge. Mm-hmm. I got confused.
I think that he does, maybe he came out with a program that's like an online thing that's called 10 Weeks. That might have been the thing that like coincides.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That, at this stage of my life, I'm not really willing to make that kind of commitment. 10 weeks.
So, Roland, what are your final thoughts on Temple of Doom?
I love it, and I think it's a really great example of how you can change the formula of something that was successful and make the first part better as well.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with you, because this film, again, everything that is perfect about Raiders, this, admittedly, it isn't as simple as Raiders. But I don't think that that's a detriment. Again, it's not maybe as perfect, but it is, for a sequel, especially one that's a prequel, to be like, we're going from 10, 100% perfection to a 9. That is freaking amazing.
And then you follow up with another 10.
Oh, another 10. I love this franchise so much. And this is why we are both Indiana Jones fans.
Absolutely. Indeed.
Roland, where can people go to learn more about you and your work? What do you have in the pipeline right now?
I hadn't been writing for a while, but I'm just finishing off my latest romance novel, which I'm looking forward to publishing, and that's pretty much all I'm doing at the moment, just focusing on like the behind the scenes thing. But if you just type in Roland Hulme, then I'll appear all over the internet I'm like a bad penny, to quote Indiana Jones.
And you have a fantastic YouTube channel that you've done some great Bond videos on lately. So people should be sure to check it out.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Roland, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It is always fun to talk about these things with you, especially.
Absolutely.